Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Balanced Approach podcast. I'm your host, Louis Padian. Make sure you are subscribed wherever you get your podcasts to be kept up to date. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Balanced Approach podcast. Today we'll be covering all things that are mistakes when people come to tracking their calorie intake or eating a bit better, monitoring their food, however you want to put it. There's 6 common things that I've seen when I'm working with clients that often can make a huge difference when we find ways to overcome them. So first off is not portioning accurately. So people often underestimate their calorie intake. People often think that they're not eating as much as they actually are. And we see this a lot in research. There's a piece of research that I saw that when they looked at men and women, UK adults underestimate their daily caloric intake by 50%. So men consume about an extra 1,000 more calories and women consume about 800 more calories than they actually realise, which is huge numbers, but the research report wasn't that good. But it's a common trend that we often see. A 2015 report found that people actually underestimated how many calories and how much food was on the plate by 30%, which is a decent amount. If you're consistently doing that, and what they found was that the plate size significantly influenced the people's portion size. So if you have bigger plates, people tend to want to fill the plate. So that can be something that people can often find is quite helpful, eating off smaller plates. And if you think that nutrition professionals are immune to this, actually, we're not. They found that in a 2013 study, found that experienced nutrition professionals underestimate portion size by an average of 15%. when relying on visual estimations alone. So again, we're not perfect. People often underestimate how much they're eating, and people tell me how much they think they're actually eating, and actually if they ate that, there'd be a severe calorie deficit. And it's not a blame game. It's not me saying that this is they're there to blame for this. It's just a common thing with humans, and there's some really interesting stuff we'll cover later on in the episode around what sort of foods people underreport and what people tend to include in their diaries, which you probably will recognise, empathise with. So what would be a way around this? People typically find that being a bit more precise with their measuring tools, having kitchen scales, and I've often discussed with clients and patients, is that we only need to be as accurate with our monitoring or our calorie intake as long as we're getting results. If people are skipping a few things and calorie wise it doesn't look quite right on the page for me, but they're still making progress, I'm not going to tighten them up on it, because that's added stress that we're adding in there. But if people aren't losing weight, we will tend to find more regimented, more restraint ways of eating, more particular ways of eating. So instead of going from a food portion or food plate size, we'll actually probably go to tracking macros and calories. And there's lots of free ways to do this. There's MyFitnessPal, NutriCheck. NutriCheck tends to be a bit better, but you do have to pay for it. But both those are things that I use a lot with my clients. They link up with the platform that I use, so I can actually see their food diaries, and that helps me get a better understanding of what people are eating. Not necessarily a perfect picture, but an idea of what people are putting in their food diary and what they think they're eating. So that's first one, is not portioning food accurately. Second, and this is kind of linked in, but selective memory. People forget what they've eaten. If I sat down with you now and said, what did you eat on Friday last week or Thursday last week? You probably wouldn't have much of an idea unless you sort of eat similar things all the time, which can be a helpful tool when trying to lose weight and get a bit healthier. However, people who leave it to the end of the day and looking to fill in their food diary might not be as accurate as people who do it when they're currently eating. And study shows that people, what we'd call, have amnesia and may overconsume on their calories due to not remembering what certain foods, especially if they weren't concentrating at the time. So if we're looking at some of the research around this, there's the social desirability bias, and then there's the snacking amnesia. So one paper from 2019 had a look at the challenges of what we call dietary recall, people remembering what they ate, and noticing that individuals tend to underreport consumption of less healthy foods, the highly caloric foods usually, and overreport consumption of healthier foods. And that's the social desirability. And I was guilty of this when I was a player, and coaches would be like, we want to keep a food diary. I'd probably keep out a few chocolate bars and things like that. Probably definitely include maybe a little bit more salad, fruit and veg. And that can skew self-reported data massively. and it's something that we consciously do, but also subconsciously do as well. The snacking amnesia is something that you're probably very aware of, is that mindless eating or distracted eating. People can overconsume quite a lot of calories and food when they're not concentrating on the food at hand. If they're watching TV, if they're at a sports event, or just grazing in general, that can quickly add up, and people don't tend to recall that very well. So again, not being fully aware and their memory not being their best friend, this is why we'd probably look at trying to recall food throughout the day, and that can be a useful tactic as well. So what's the solution to this? Developing a bit of routine with recording your meals. I know on some of the apps like MyFitnessPal, I don't know if on NutriCheck you can set reminders for tracking certain meals throughout the day, and even on the platform I use, that we have different ways of tracking food and different ways that we manage people's nutrition. Some of it is to do with calories and calorie targets, but we also have a visual food diary on there as well. People can take photos on their food and sort of explain what's on the plate to me. And that can be a good reminder for when doing at the end of the day record. So you should take a photo, upload it, or take a photo and keep it on your phone. At the end of the day, sit down and recall it. It probably won't be as accurate as if you did at the time, but it's still a lot more accurate than if you just left it without taking those photos. So that's a good way around that. If you find that you're often forgetting what you've eaten, taking a quick photo or keeping an accurate food diary at the time can be a really good way around that. Next up is something that MyFitnessPal is really, really bad for in a way, is choosing the wrong product or tracking the wrong thing. Common things around this would be people tracking fat-free versions when they might be having full fat and not knowing the difference, or different brands having fairly different macronutrient profiles, or not tracking the portion aspect of that food correctly. And I've been caught out with this as well. Marketing is really, really rife in the health food industry or in the snacks industry. They're trying to tell you the stuff that they want you to know or believe about the foods. But actually we should be looking at the things that they have to tell us around the macronutrients, the calories, the protein, the fats and the carbs on their nutrition label. And I'll explain a bit more about that in a second. But people often select the healthier version, or they might even be selecting the wrong version on MyFitnessPal. MyFitnessPal has lots of different versions for the same foods that people have added into their library. It's not a regulated library like NutriCheck is. NutriCheck is fully regulated. When you scan a barcode, it'll pull up that exact product, and that's all been checked beforehand. That's why I'm a much bigger fan of that. But there is a cost to that each year. I think it's about £28. Another drawback of NutriCheck is that actually it doesn't currently sync up with the platform I use for my clients, which is a little frustrating. However, the benefits on it are probably outweigh that. Anyway, back to it. MyFitnessPal can be added. So people can add a version of a chocolate bar or a food on there and only put the calories in, but not necessarily put the macronutrients in. They might not put the protein, the fiber, saturated fats, or anything like that. The calorie input might be wrong, and it'll be on the library, and they can track that food and track it with all the wrong data. So that can be really frustrating. But also there can be a bit of misleading with some of this as well. So I've seen it on a few different sort of snack bars where on the front of the bar, it could say, for example, only 230 calories with 14 grams of protein, two separate little advertisements on the front of the bar. However, one of them will have a little asterisk next to it. So when I actually looked at the label, the asterisk was on the 14 grams from what I remember. It might have been, Anyway, when I had a look at it, the 14 grams was in the whole bar, and the bar was 90 grams in itself. So 14 grams of protein per 90 grams, which wouldn't be the end of the world. But however, the calories that they had on the front of it was actually per half bar, which is what they counted as a serving. So you'd think that you're getting 14 grams of protein for 230 calories. However, it's actually 460 calories for 14 grams of protein. Not the end of the world, but if you're consistently mismeasuring that could be eating a significant amount into your calorie deficit each day, or whenever you're having them. So having a look at what companies actually have to tell you the macronutrient profile on the back per 100 grams is a really useful way to sort of moderate that, and maybe taking the claims that they make around being high protein or how many grams of protein, how many calories, all that sort of stuff with a pinch of salt, and actually doing your own bit of reading on the back. That's probably the best way around that. Stuff that we call around some of these claims that are nutritional claims, which I could probably do another episode on what these actually claims are and what the boundaries are for companies being able to use these claims. But we'd call them health halos. And a 2013 study found that products labelled as low fat or organic are often perceived to be healthier, leading to people overeating on them. Actually, those don't mean that they are healthy. They don't mean that they're in line with your goals, unless your goal is to eat a low-fat food. But what is the portion that allows that to be low-fat? And organic, if you prefer organic food and that makes you feel better, it's better. You have a bit of a conscious approach to your food, then that's brilliant. However, it does not mean it's any healthier and doesn't mean that it's any better for you. So bit of misleading or miscommunication with some of the labels when it comes to choosing the wrong products is something that I often see. Solution to this is being careful you're reading your food labels, ingredients lists on the foods as well if you do have any allergies, and making more informed choices. Again, being able to compare foods on there. I've just created a massive protein source list for my clients at the moment, and I've made a special effort to make sure I've got all the foods that are listed as good protein sources, high protein sources, about 13 pages worth, categorized them into groups, but made sure that I had per 100 grams on there and per serving, because per 100 grams allows you to compare foods a bit more easily, because you can see per 100 grams which is going to be the highest protein source. But then also per serving is really good, because often we don't eat the same amount of all the foods. We might have 150 grams of yogurt but only 30 grams of nuts. So actually how much protein am I getting per serving is really good to know, but actually seeing what might be a better, more calorie conscious and protein source per meal, or if you're having a snack, can actually be done a lot better. So having that comparability is really, really useful as well. Number 4 is focusing solely on calories. This is something that people often miss, and they often find their own way with this. But early on in your journey, once you've got to the understanding of that it is all about energy in versus energy out, or that is what's going to dictate weight loss, you maybe go and treat it as a bit of a game where you go, right, for these calories, what sort of foods can I get in there? How much fun food can I have in there? Which can be really liberating if you feel like you've been on a restrictive diet in the past, or if you've come from a cult like Slimming World, for example, where certain foods are banned or you feel guilty around them. Actually being able to lose weight and make progress while eating things like chocolate bars and crisps, and maybe not having the healthiest diet but still making progress, then that can be really liberating for people. However, after a while, you probably start to realize that there's other factors that are important. They don't necessarily dictate the amount of calories or the amount of weight that you'll lose in the short term, but they might impact how many calories that you're eating in the medium and long term. Those sort of things might be protein, they might be on whole foods, they might be on fiber. All these things are important, but also like satisfaction is important as well. So having a higher protein or a lower protein food for the same amount of calories won't impact the amount of weight you're losing, but it might affect how full you feel from that meal. So it might impact your ability to manage that energy intake throughout the day. Also might impact your ability to get progress in your training, gain muscle if that's something you're aiming to do, or retain muscle if you're on a diet, which are all important, and that can impact our progress physically over weeks, months, years especially. Fibre is another one. People having a poor quality diet with low fibre, yes, it might mean that they're a bit hungrier, but also we know that fibre as well as protein is correlated with better health outcomes long term, and foods that are high in fibre tend to have lots of health benefits in the short term with regards to digestion, but also in the long term regards to cardiovascular disease, blood pressure and things like that. So being aware of what's actually within the foods, and again around satiety as well, that if we're going the other end of the spectrum of going, well, if I'm looking for a really low calorie snack and having lots of that low calorie snack that I end up eating 400-500 calories, trying to avoid eating a chocolate bar, sometimes the chocolate bar is a better choice, that I'm more satisfied from that. Might not be as full, but it's scratching the itch that I was trying to chase with all those low calorie, potentially something like a rice cake or something, or skinny bars or whatever they are. Sometimes the real thing is worth the short term having more calories, because it means that you scratch that itch rather than chasing that bottomless pit of, right, I'm trying to feel satisfied and feel full, but actually that's not what I'm wanting. I'm wanting something that's going to taste nice and tick those boxes with regards to taste and satisfaction from the meal. So focusing solely on calories is important, but it's not the only thing to focus on. Number 5 is not planning ahead. So people who don't tend to plan their meals, and this is something I often work a lot on with people, is coming up with if and then strategies, trying to get them to think ahead with their food. Often it's trying to simplify the way that they eat and not make it a new eating plan every day, often having a handful of meals that you rotate through for your breakfast and your lunch when you're at work can be part of that routine, can be quite familiar, finding things that you are nutritious, things that are tasty, things that are aligned with your goals, that are easy to prep, that are affordable. Ticking all of those boxes, having a handful of those in the bank and going, right, I fancy this for breakfast, I've got this option, I've got fancy savoury, I fancy sweet, I fancy something that I can take to work, I fancy something that I can make at home in 10-15 minutes. Having options like that tick all those boxes can be really, really useful in planning. If you turn up to breakfast every day and going, what am I going to have? And you've got 10 options in the cupboard. 2 of them are probably more in line of what you want to do. But when you're hungry in the morning, you're not yourself, which is something else we'll discuss in a second. You're more likely to choose the thing that you want right now, not what you really want in the long term. So making impulsive eating choices that are potentially not as desirable to what you want to achieve can be really, really damaging to long-term progress. So having a bit of a plan in there, thinking about what you're doing for the week, planning your meals for the week in order to know what you need to get from the shops, can be a really useful tactic. And a 2017 study found that individuals who engage in meal planning were more likely to have healthier diets, lower body weight, and reduced risk of obesity. Makes sense, really. We sort of could have gathered that. The other thing I mentioned there was around hangry choices, and something that I always discuss with clients and patients is you're not you when you're hungry, like the Snickers advert says. When you're hungry, you're going to be really impulsive. Your body knows where what's got calories in, what tastes nice, and you're going to be less rational. You're going to be more emotional. So actually being aware of that and planning ahead means that you don't have to, or you make it more difficult to make those less helpful decisions. You make it easier for you to make decisions that are in line with things that you really want long term. And this was found in research in 2014 that hunger can significantly impair decision making, leading to impulsive and less healthy food choices. We know this, it's useful that the research points this out, but actually we see this day to day when people are tired, they're fed up, they've had a long day. And something else I do with a lot of clients and patients, and I do myself, is having a few bankers in the fridge or freezer that aren't the most healthy option potentially, or aren't the most nutritious, but are better options than the other end of the spectrum. So something like a frozen pizza, having those in, probably have one of those once a week, maybe twice a week. On nights when I can't be asked to cook, on nights when we haven't got time, we'll just sit down and go, should we have pizza tonight? And that pizza is the one that I have because I'm gluten-free, is the Goodfellas one, which is the best one that I found that is gluten-free. Is less than 800 calories. It doesn't blow your socks off, but it's nice. But it's far better than me going, right, I'll go and get a Domino's. Financially, it's about a fifth of the price, but calorie-wise, it's less than half the calories from pizza I'd order from Domino's or Pizza Hut, which Domino's is awful for gluten-free pizzas. If anybody is listening gluten-free and thinking about it, they're not very good. They just get the base and top it. But that's a story for another day. Pizza Hut are all right, but again, it's like 15 quid when I can get a frozen one that's just as good, like 3 quid, 4 quid, whatever it is. So having those in the fridge or freezer as a backup throughout the week, or planning them in throughout the week on nights where potentially you know you're going to be a bit short on time, a bit tired, can be good options to have in. Is it the quote-unquote perfect way to eat throughout the week? No, not the most nutritious, but helps me and helps my clients stay on track, and also ticks that satiety, that appetite, that in line with your goals. And yeah, it's just a better and more realistic way of living and moving forward. So solution to this is establishing a weekly meal plan or approach to food, preparing meals in advance if you can, so batch cooking, and having those healthier options. And this is something that I often sit down with clients. We might work on sort of a certain group of meals that might be recommended for them. We might have a more structured plan or way of eating. We might have a bit more flexibility depending on what they're at and what they need. Very different approaches. Last but not least is relying solely on body weight to measure progress, which is another thing that can really frustrate people. Weighing yourself can be really misleading. It doesn't account for changes in water storage, which tends to be the one thing that fluctuates the most and can be impacted by salt, food, stress, menstrual cycle, training, food in your digestive tract as well, gaining muscle. All these things impact your body weight, but don't impact the thing that we're trying to measure, which is changes in body fat. And this means that people can get really frustrated and have a negative relationship with the scales, which is completely understandable. And often something that I work on and when the time's right with a client or patient, we might not use it at all, but building a better relationship with the scales can be really helpful for people. But also, we want to focus on other things that matter. So people often want to lose weight, and the question might be after that, why do you want to lose weight? Well, most people, being lighter might be part of it, but often they want to feel more confident, they want to have more energy, they want to be fitter, they want to be able to do X, Y, Z, they want to feel more comfortable in their clothes, they want to reduce their belly or whatever. So why not measure those things as well? Why not measure the things that we actually want to measure alongside weight loss? It gives us a better rounded picture. Someone might want to look better in photos, so let's take progress photos every week, and not in the traditional way where people have to get down to your pants or anything like that. Just wearing the same outfit every week and using that as a sort of a standard measurement and seeing where it's a bit looser, where it might be a bit tighter, and measuring progress that way. And using this to paint the overall picture rather than going, right, my success depends on the scales, which I know are flawed, which I know can be really damaging and negatively impacting myself. Actually, I'll measure all these other things before: my energy levels, how well I'm sleeping, my social relationship, how's my relationship with food, how's my waist circumference, how's my hip circumference, because that's a really good metric measure for health outcomes as well, hip circumference and waist circumference, and how my clothes fitting. If I've got a certain outfit I want to get into, maybe that'll be sort of thing of how I'm getting on. So again, using different ways to measure progress, because some of the things that we might gain muscle. I'm working with clients now that are working with personal trainers, and some are working with me on their strength and fitness as well and gaining muscle. So that will negatively impact our progress on the scale. So why not use circumferences to measure that? So for example, they might not have lost weight that week, but their energy levels are better, they're less stressed, they're sleeping well, and they've measured their arms and they're gaining a bit of muscle around there, they've lost some inches or centimetres off their waist and their hips. Well, for me, that's saying that they're losing weight, they're gaining muscle, and potentially the scale's just a bit high this week with a bit of water retention, and that's completely fine. So we don't need to let that dictate our success. Actually having multiple measures of success and multiple measures of progress is a really, really good way moving forward. So a 2015 review, just a bit of research to support this, emphasised the importance of considering non-scale measures of progress such as waist circumference, clothing size, energy levels and mood to get a more complete picture of health and well-being. As I've just said, it can really, really change and be a bit of a game changer for people when they're measuring progress. Sometimes not using the scales at all can be really liberating for people, and actually going, right, waist circumference, I want to do progress photos, I want to write a little diary on how this specific outfit is that I'm taking photos in feels every week, my mood, my sleep, and maybe do a quarterly weigh-in, because if all those other measurements are moving in the right direction, you'll guarantee if you're weighing yourself quarterly, there'll be a difference. So something else to consider there. Solution to this: incorporate additional metrics such as body weight, body measurements, progress photos and fitness milestones. Again, you might be able to run certain distances, do chin-ups, push-ups, whatever it is, do the stairs, whatever it is, use that as a metric that you actually want to do. And I often set these targets with my clients, and we might have 3 or 4 different measurements, physical measurements, but we might have goals in there about what sort of milestones that we want to hit. So by a stone off, and this is another thing that can be really useful, is having a chart that you can tick off every pound, every kilo, every half pound, tick it off and have milestones that you work towards. Again, seeing that visual progress over weeks and months can make you realise how far you've come, which people often don't see. They see the fact the scale's gone up over the last few days when actually it's gone down for the last 6 months consistently, and they'll start panicking. So don't worry if the scale is not playing ball, or if you have been let down in the past by just using the scale measurement. Often, actually, we just need to bring a few different metrics in there and keep an eye so we can get a better rounded picture of things. So hopefully that's helped you identify common pitfalls that you might have fallen to. I've fallen guilty from before, but also ways to overcome them. And by implementing these strategies, you can actually really make some solid and meaningful progress with your weight loss. So let me know how you've found this episode. If you've got any further questions, if not, I shall speak to you soon. Thank you very much for listening to the Balanced Approach podcast. If you have any questions, queries, or would like to reach out to me, please do. I am at Louis Padian Nutrition, which is at LOUISPADIAN Nutrition on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and all social media platforms. If you're looking for support in achieving your goals and living a healthier and happier and more balanced life in the process, just click the link below and inquire about working with me. But remember to subscribe wherever you're listening, share it if you think that people might find it useful, and I shall speak to you soon.